It's the Dark Reading News Desk. I'm Terry Sweeney, a contributing editor to Dark Reading. I'm delighted to be joined now by Vishal Gupta, Senior Vice President, Technology and CTO for Unisys. Vishal, thanks so much for joining us at News Desk today.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
Vishal, there's a regular conversation that we seem to be having in the security industry at large, this disconnect between security executives and the rest of the C-suite. Since buy-in and funding are so essential to security, obviously, how do we start to address this gap that feels as much cultural as it is political?
I think it's a great question, Terry. Thanks for teeing it up. So, if you think about it, the boards are now more or less understanding that security is an important risk area. 79% of the companies say it's the top 5 risk area they've got.
Wow.
So they know they need to put investments behind it, but the question is how much and where.
Right. And
so in the past, what has happened is the boards have had readouts from CISOs, and all my CISO friends, we have sort of struggled, kind of working with the CFO and others to say, how much should my house get versus all the other risks that exist in the company, and how should you allocate that investment? Now, Unisys has introduced this capability called Trust Check.
Okay.
And what that does is it lets you have objective, quantifiable conversation with the board on risk. To give you an example, let's say you're a regulated company in healthcare trying to get to cloud. Trust Check might say, you know what, that risk, if there's a breach, is $50 million. The probability of a breach is, say, 10%. Now my total risk from going to cloud is $5 million. And I can mitigate that by cyber insurance. I can mitigate that by making security investments. But I now have a very objective conversation, just like I have for other investment projects, to say, this is the risk we face, and what do we want to do about it? Do we accept it? Do we mitigate it? Do we make investments around it? And so I think it lets everybody have a much more structured, quantified, non-emotional discussion, as opposed to keep on giving money and it's never enough.
Well, and also a welcome change up from the crude measurement of ROI as a function of security.
That's right, because what is an ROI,
expenditure.
right? ROI, it's not necessarily, security will not necessarily always give you more revenue, but it is mitigating the risk and in a very quantifiable way that you have.
All right. What do you see as the frequent challenges that companies are up against as they try to both improve their security posture but also reduce exposure and risk?
So I think that's a great question, Terry. What's interesting is, this is sort of my 11th RSA, and every time I'm here, I kind of realize how challenging and interesting the world of security is. Sure. This time we have 30,000 people, 600 companies, and no dearth of technology. But then, have the breaches really improved? I look at the metrics, and the metrics really haven't improved, right? It still takes a long time for people to find they have been breached. The cost of the breach is high. The number of breaches are going up. So what's going on? So, if you look at the data, it'll tell you a lot of investments the security industry made was really in protection. New shiny objects that could protect you. And so we built all these castles and moat and perimeter and everything else. And I think in the last year or two, there's been more and more realization that protection is like, okay, I've got more of, if I think about a house, I've got, great way to know there's like something has happened and I can protect. But if they don't come through my front door and they come through my window, what do I do, right? So how many do I seal up? So now there's been this thought around, can I do fast detect? So instead of it taking like 200 days, which it takes today, and people can roam around freely in your organization, can they detect it faster? So we've introduced something called dynamic isolation, which can help you detect things a little bit faster, working together with other things. And then can I do something about it, right? If it takes me, on average, it takes people 50 days to respond. That's too much. A ransomware can spread much, much faster than that. And so the trends that I see are really aligned towards, A, assume breaches happened, really provide people least privilege, invest not just in the protection side, which is important, but in fast detect and fast response. So you can have an always-on, resilient security infrastructure.
Switching gears slightly, Kubernetes and container technologies are very much in the vanguard, but they also bring with them, of course, security challenges. What sorts of challenges do you see companies trying to address as they really ramp up their use of container technology?
Another great question. So let's put this in context first. Why are people adopting containers and Kubernetes, right? So today in 2020, about 30% of enterprise applications are starting to run in containers orchestrated by Kubernetes. Now this number, if you look 3 years out, based upon some of the data from Forrester and Gartner, goes up to 75%. So 75% of the application in production are going to be running in containers and orchestrated by Kubernetes. So this is going to become it's already an important, but it's going to become an increasingly very, very important part of your digital infrastructure. So therefore, if I'm a CISO, if I'm a CIO, I have to think about what is this exposing me to? Sure. Because these containers and Kubernetes can run both in on-prem and in cloud. So it's not like, I can decide to quote unquote escape from them. They're going to face me regardless. Sure. And so the challenges these bring to you is, you need to first have visibility, what's running where. Then there's a lot of inter-process communication that's happening. How do you make sure that there's a man-in-the-middle attack is not happening? How do you make sure this communication between these container pods is not sort of getting intercepted? How do you make sure those container images don't have vulnerabilities and are creating a lot of challenges? And so when we announced Stealth 5.0 just yesterday, this is one of the areas we announced where we'll have stealth agents that can be embedded as part of the containers. We can look at the container images. We can look at things like how do we do microsegmentation, how do we do cloaking of the Kubernetes nodes. So that way, if you don't need to be consuming a service, you shouldn't be able to see it. We want to make sure within a Kubernetes nodes, all the communication that's happening can be encrypted. We want to reduce the attack surface of those Kubernetes nodes and containers. And so we're very excited that in a technology that's going to become more and more important, which is container and Kubernetes, we'll have a solution that not only addresses some of the security challenges, it'll work seamlessly whether you're working in the cloud or on-prem or somewhere a hybrid between the two. And so it'll really work across all of those, across bare metal, across running in VMs, or across running in any of the three clouds.
That's great. What are some of the other securities that you see large companies trying to address as they defend, protect, or manage their data and IT assets?
So I think one of the big challenges of our time is really around identity, right? Because identity, we all know, none of us love these passwords, and we're trying to create these 12 and 16 character passwords with every possible special character, and we're probably uttering some of them under our breath as well, right, when we're typing those. And the problem is, as you keep on changing them, there's this big dark web with like 2 billion of these that everybody, so everybody kind of knows a name password that I've used in some account, and it's quite likely that I would have used them in some other place. And so the question is, how do you, in the world of security, we have also heard insider threats going up, but there is no way to attribute that somebody was who they are. And so if you think about these problems of both the big dark web with the identity stolen, as well as around the risk with attribution, I think biometrics is one of the areas that's going to become more and more important. Because even if I think about cloud, imagine all your data is in one place. It's very easy to get to. You can no longer, quote unquote, say, I'm going to essentially disconnect it from everything else. I'm going to sort of take it away. And so for all of these threat vectors that we're talking about, whether you're accessing from your mobile devices, from cloud and everything, when you're accessing any sensitive data, the ability to both have attribution and the ability to really ensure the person is who they say they are, something like biometrics, I believe, will play a bigger role.
Well, we'll say more about that, because obviously there's multi-modes of different biometrics. Which do you see as being most effective in really addressing effectively this ID management challenge?
I think different modes have different value, and at the end of the day, it's also about user choice. And so what we have seen is, for example, when you're at the airport, right, anybody who comes through some things with TSA these days, right, if you have a global entry or something like that, right, you will see that typically, your fingerprints are getting used up. right? Some of the places, with our Face ID, we see our face is getting used up. Some other places are voice getting used up, or iris if you're going into a high detection sort of a site. So I think the trick is actually enabling more of a user biometric choice and giving people the choice across multiple modes, because some people like touch, some like touchless. In some cases, there is, some people will say, don't send it to my phone, and therefore, my face will not work. And for some others, some other pieces there. So we want technologies that can work at scale, at scale of, entire country level. So for example, in one of the countries in Asia Pacific, we're handling a biometric database of 200 million records, where every transaction that happens, we can really authenticate that. We can enroll people. We can even do things like self-enrollment, where people can take their own picture, validate it with their driving license, and say, yep, this is me. And so every time they have to validate themselves, that becomes an easy form. So I think the key is make it work in a multimodal way, make it work at scale, and make it work at convenience. So that way it becomes easy to adopt these solutions.
Sure. The user buy-in issue and giving people choice. The invasiveness of something, at least for me, of like a retinal scan, for instance.
You don't look forward to that, do you?
No, I don't. I'm happy to give fingerprints, but
yeah. There's different people, right? You may have a millennial who has a very total different view, right? Where they may not want to do anything with their fingerprint.
Of course.
And so I think the choice, and I think also the other benefit of multimodal is each of these has a level of error rate. So let's say each of them might be accurate to 3 nines, 99.9, but if you combine them, now the error rate is almost 0, right? It's like, accurate to 5 nines. And so there's a lot of benefit about really doing deduplication, real combination, easy authentication, and giving the ability to be having them applied in a variety of use cases.
All right. Vishal, another area I wanted to ask you about was VPN security. VPNs continue to be popular despite their porousness and well-documented security challenges. Sure. In parallel, like the advent of cloud makes VPN management, if not more problematic, certainly more challenging. So what are you telling users here? What advice do you give them?
Yeah, I think if we ask people who loves VPN, I don't think we'll get a lot of hands up, right? So nobody loves VPN. It's what they kind of have to do that the IT makes them do. Sure. And what's interesting is if you looked at what is the biggest attack vector these days, do you know what it is? It's the VPN concentrator. Do you know why? Because if you get inside the VPN concentrator, now you're trusted. You could go and do anything to any system, right? And so if you really think about it, you have a technology that was meant for security that the hackers figured out, okay, this is what's happening, and now they've actually turned it into a way of attack and really, inflicting a lot of damage on the company. Sure. And so when we looked at it and we talked to a number of customers, we said there's got to be a better solution. You're spending all this time connecting, your VPN connecting before you do anything. So first, we felt we could save time. In fact, we believe we can save about 50% of the time it takes to establish this connection, because we could establish with stealth a secure tunnel much faster. Second, we felt that instead of giving people the access with VPN to the old infrastructure, just give them access to a particular application port. So if you have to give people who are traveling or in sales and services access to certain applications outside the perimeter, at the maximum, just give them access to that application on that port. So that's all they can do. They cannot go inside and do all kinds of other things, even if there was a bad actor there. So we made it better by cutting down the connection time, and we made it more secure by really cutting down the amount of access people were getting through those VPNs.
All right. Vishal, thanks for the insights and giving us a lot to think about here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Terry, for having me.
We've been talking with Vishal Gupta of Unisys. This has been Terry Sweeney for Dark Reading News Desk. Thanks for joining us today.